You're tuned in to 22 Crime, where the truth hides in the details. Together, we dive into the darkest corners of human nature, exploring the mysteries that have left investigators puzzled and families searching for justice. Because in the world of crime, the truth is never as simple as it seems. With just 22 minutes on the clock, let's dive into today's case and uncover the shocking truth. If you're craving more details after this episode, be sure to check out the full-length version for an even deeper dive into this chilling mystery. The clock is ticking. Let's uncover the truth behind today's mystery. Viewer discretion is advised. 22 is a true crime podcast that delves into real-life crime stories, which often involve graphic descriptions, sensitive content, and strong language that may not be suitable for all audiences. We strive to present these cases with the utmost respect for the victims and their families. Please note that the content discussed may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Additionally, all resources and information presented in this podcast are obtained from publicly available internet sources. Listener discretion is strongly advised, and we recommend that only mature audiences proceed with caution. If you are sensitive to such content, please consider watching another video. Stay safe and take care of your mental health. Welcome back to 22 Crime, where we reveal the darker truths behind perfect facades. Today's story is one of deception, betrayal, and murder. A tale of Timothy Tillman, a man who appeared to have it all until his secret double life unraveled. In Vincent, Alabama, Tillman was seen as the ideal pastor, charismatic, trustworthy, and captivating. His sermons were spellbinding, drawing people in week after week. To his congregation, Tillman wasn't just a pastor, he was a savior. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind his rise to prominence lay a darker side. He wasn't just Timothy Tillman, the beloved pastor, but also Timothy McNally, a fictional persona created to live out a twisted fantasy. In 2003, Tillman moved to Vincent with his wife Janet and their 2 daughters, quickly becoming the congregation's favorite. On the outside, they were the model Christian family, but beneath the surface, Tillman's demons were beginning to emerge. His double life wasn't new. In the mid-90s, Tillman was forced to leave a Florida church after being caught leaving a strip club. Later, in Minnesota, an affair with a congregant led to another departure. Each time, his wife Janet stood by him, uprooting their family repeatedly to keep it together, unaware of the full extent of his deceit. While preaching faith and forgiveness on Sundays, Timothy led a secret life as MC Nally, a Navy SEAL in an affair with Molly Beasy. To Molly, Timothy wasn't a pastor, but a divorced hero who promised her a future. He even went so far as to forge an identity, sending photos of himself in a Navy uniform and creating an entirely false persona. Back home, the Tillmans' finances were crumbling. Janet confided in friends, but she continued to protect her husband's image. Meanwhile, Timothy was spiraling. In 2001, he had taken out a life insurance policy on Janet, a safeguard that, over time, became a potential escape plan. As his financial woes deepened, that policy turned into an opportunity. Timothy was ready to walk away from everything: his marriage, his family, his church. The only obstacle in his path was Janet. It was just before 6 p.m. on a quiet evening when Timothy Tillman pulled into his driveway. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn of the parsonage. His car, a familiar sight in the church parking lot, now sat in the driveway, weighed down by the shotguns used during the recent turkey shoot fundraiser. But this evening would be far from ordinary. In a matter of moments, everything would change for the Tillman family and for the town of Vincent. Timothy stepped out of the car, his demeanor calm, almost detached. He greeted his wife Janet as she came outside to help unload the weapons. Inside the house, their 2 daughters, Jessica and Tiffany, were oblivious to the tragedy that was about to unfold. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. It was an ordinary moment, a pastor returning home, his wife lending a helping hand. But beneath Timothy's calm exterior, there was a plan, a dark intention that would soon be carried out. He handed one of the shotguns to Janet, telling her to store it inside. He kept the other 2 for himself, claiming they needed to be put away for safekeeping. After all, they couldn't leave firearms lying around the church with children nearby. Janet, ever the supportive wife, did as she was asked. She trusted her husband. How could she not? He was a man of God, a father, a husband. But as she carried the shotgun into the house, something shifted. A sense of unease, perhaps. If she felt it, we'll never know, because she never had the chance to speak those words. As Janet walked toward their bedroom, Timothy followed closely behind, the two shotguns heavy in his hands. The next moments would be both swift and fatal. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the sound of a gunshot. Janet crumpled to the floor. The shotgun had discharged, and the bullet tore through her back with brutal precision. She fell forward, gasping for air, her body convulsing in pain as blood pooled beneath her. Her life was slipping away. But even as the life drained from her, Janet's last words were not of fear or betrayal. In her final moments, she whispered words of love, words meant for her husband and her daughters. "I love you," she gasped. "I love you." These were her last breaths, before the light in her eyes faded, and the world she had known, the family she had built, was gone. Timothy's reaction was like everything else in his life, controlled, almost rehearsed. There was no immediate rush to Janet's side, no frantic call for help. Instead, Timothy stumbled outside, where members of the congregation had begun to gather for the evening service. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles illuminated the scene as Timothy stood on the porch, covering his face with his hands, rocking back and forth in a performance of anguish. "What have I done? What have I done?" he wailed, over and over, his cries echoing across the lawn as the congregation looked on in shock. The authorities arrived quickly, and Timothy was escorted to the police station to give a statement. His explanation? The gun had gone off accidentally. He claimed the weapon had discharged unexpectedly as he followed Janet into the bedroom, striking her in the back. A tragic mishap, he insisted, nothing more than a horrible accident. And, at first, his story seemed plausible enough. The congregation, still in shock from Janet's sudden death, rallied around Timothy. They offered their support, their sympathy, and even financial assistance. After all, Timothy was their pastor, their spiritual leader. Who could doubt him? The church elders, concerned for his emotional well-being, even took the precaution of removing all weapons from his home, fearing he might harm himself in his grief. His daughters were taken in by members of the congregation, sheltered from the immediate aftermath of the tragedy. It appeared, for a time, that the entire town of Vincent had bought into Timothy's version of events. After all, who would believe that a man of God, someone so trusted, could harbor such darkness within? But, as we know, appearances can be deceiving. Timothy's behavior in the days following Janet's death started to raise questions. While the town grieved alongside him, Timothy seemed distant, detached. Just weeks after his wife's passing, he announced that he needed to leave town for a pastor's retreat, an opportunity to reflect, to heal, or so he said. But to those who knew him best, this sudden retreat seemed suspicious. Why would a grieving husband, now a single father, abandon his daughters so soon after such a devastating loss? Was he really seeking solace, or was Timothy running from the truth? As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in Timothy's story grew deeper. And soon, the police would begin to uncover the disturbing reality behind Janet's death, a reality far darker than anyone could have imagined. In the weeks following Janet Tillman's death, questions started to emerge, questions that went beyond the initial shock of tragedy. One person, in particular, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Janet's sister, Joan, had always known her sibling to be cautious and careful, the kind of person who wouldn't fall victim to a so-called accidental shotgun discharge. Joan's suspicions about Timothy's role in Janet's death grew stronger by the day. She decided to act, contacting the Alabama Bureau of Investigation and pleading for someone to take a closer look. Detective Bartle was that someone. Bartle's first move was to review the original police report. On the surface, it seemed straightforward. Timothy, the grieving husband, had explained that Janet's death was a tragic mishap, the result of an accidental shotgun discharge. But as Bartle dug deeper, he began noticing subtle cracks in Timothy's story. Watching Timothy's interrogation video only fueled Bartle's suspicions. Timothy's sobbing seemed rehearsed, his grief almost performative. He would cry loudly, then stop abruptly, as if waiting for the right moment to resume. Bartle sensed that this wasn't genuine sorrow, it was an act. The turning point came when police found something shocking during a routine background check. Timothy Tillman had a second identity. He didn't just have one driver's license, but two, one under the name Timothy Patrick McNally. This discovery marked a pivotal moment in Bartle's investigation. Why would a pastor need a second identity? As Bartle looked deeper into Timothy's past, the story took a darker turn. Timothy wasn't the upstanding pastor he appeared to be. Beneath his facade was a man who had spent years living a life of scandal and deceit. Bartle uncovered a pattern. Whenever Timothy's lies started to surface, he would flee, dragging his family along to another town, another congregation. In Florida, he was caught leaving a strip club, leading to his resignation. In Minnesota, an affair with a congregant forced him out again. And the most disturbing incident? His arrest and 6-month jail sentence for soliciting a prostitute. Timothy's double life was unraveling. Then came the most damning piece of evidence. Bartle uncovered a forged $5,000 loan check, signed in Janet's name months after her death. Timothy, whose finances were in shambles, had resorted to forging his late wife's signature to secure funds. This wasn't just financial desperation, it was proof of Timothy's willingness to do whatever it took to maintain control. For Bartle, the forged check was the final piece of the puzzle. Combined with Timothy's double life as Timothy McNally, the affair with Molly Beasy, and the suspicious circumstances of Janet's death, it became clear that Janet's demise wasn't an accident. It was the calculated act of a man whose world of lies had finally begun to collapse around him. By early 2007, Timothy Tillman was living in Florida, out on bond for forgery, attempting to salvage what remained of his life. He had moved closer to his family, and to Molly, the woman still believing his elaborate lies. But as Timothy tried to cling to the remnants of his double life, Detective Bartle had been working tirelessly, collecting the evidence needed to bring Timothy's deception to an end. Now, Bartle was ready to act. It was a cool, quiet morning when Bartle and his team arrived at Timothy's workplace. The building was ordinary, blending into the landscape of a typical Florida office complex. But for Bartle, this was no ordinary moment. This was the culmination of months of investigation, the moment when Timothy Tillman's carefully crafted lies would catch up to him. Bartle entered the office, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Timothy, sitting at his desk, typing away, unaware of what was about to unfold. Calmly, Bartle approached and said, "Timothy Tillman, you're under arrest for the murder of Janet Tillman." For a moment, Timothy froze, his hands hovering over the keyboard as the weight of those words sank in. His calm facade, so carefully maintained, began to crumble. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out, but there was none. The detectives moved in, handcuffs clicking into place, and Timothy Tillman's freedom came to an abrupt end. In the interrogation room, Bartle took his time. The room was cold, lit by a single overhead lamp, casting long shadows across the table where Timothy sat, fidgeting. Bartle's questions started simply: details about Janet's death, the turkey shoot, the story Timothy had told local police. Timothy answered smoothly, as if reading from a script, but Bartle wasn't looking for rehearsed lies. He was looking for cracks in the story. With each question, Bartle poked holes in Timothy's narrative. Why had the gun gone off if it had been unloaded? Why had Janet been shot in the back? Why had Timothy brought the shotguns home from the church in the first place? Timothy's responses, initially calm, began to grow more defensive. Bartle could feel the pressure building, the cracks widening in Timothy's carefully constructed lie. Then, Bartle asked the pivotal question: why did you change your name to Timothy McNally? For a brief moment, Timothy's face twitched, a small reaction, but enough for Bartle to see his weakness. Timothy stumbled through an explanation, telling a convoluted story about his brother's affair with Janet, but Bartle wasn't buying it. He pressed harder, pointing out how Timothy had changed his name back to Tillman just days before Janet's death. Timothy's frustration grew, his responses becoming erratic, his calm pastor persona shattering. Finally, in a moment of desperation, Timothy slammed his hands on the table, shouting, "I didn't mean to kill her." The room fell silent, the confession echoing off the walls. For the first time, Timothy had admitted the truth. Janet's death was no accident. It had taken months of investigation, but Bartle had finally broken through. Timothy Tillman, the man who had once preached faith and redemption, had been undone by his own lies. His life of deception had caught up with him, and in the end, it had led to murder. But the question still lingered. How had a man trusted by his entire community, a man skilled in manipulating others, reached the point where murder seemed like his only escape? As we continue to uncover Timothy Tillman's story, we'll dive deeper into the psychology of a man who built his entire life on lies, and the devastating consequences that followed. It was a chilly morning in late 2009 when Timothy Tillman's trial for the murder of his wife, Janet, began. As he sat at the defense table, his face calm, his demeanor stoic, you'd almost believe he still thought he could escape the consequences of his actions. But the prosecution had come prepared, with months of evidence meticulously gathered to paint a damning picture of Timothy, a man who had carefully planned the murder of his wife. Across the aisle, Assistant District Attorney Thomas Spence was ready to present his case. Spence, known for his methodical and relentless approach, began his opening statement with a simple, yet powerful declaration. Adada Spence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today to seek justice for Janet Tillman, a loving wife, a devoted mother, and a kind-hearted woman whose life was cut short by the very man who was supposed to protect her. This case is not about a tragic accident. It is about a premeditated murder, committed by a man who sought to escape his failing life, his financial troubles, and his deceitful actions by killing his wife. Spence then laid out the key points of the case: the life insurance policy, the affair with Molly Beasy, the suspicious circumstances surrounding the shooting, and the forged check that had ultimately led to Timothy's arrest. The portrait of Timothy Tillman that emerged wasn't of a grieving husband, but of a man who had been living a lie for years. A man who saw his wife's death as the solution to all his problems. But the defense had their own strategy. Timothy's lead attorney, Richard Gorman, was a seasoned lawyer, known for his ability to tug at the emotions of a jury. Gorman's argument? Timothy was a broken man, a husband who had made mistakes, but who had never intended to kill his wife. Gorman would argue that Janet's death was a tragedy, not a murder. But, as the trial unfolded, it became clear that the prosecution had far more than just theories. They had evidence. Evidence that proved difficult for the defense to explain away. The first major blow to Timothy's defense came when the prosecution called their first key witness, Jimmy Abbott, a member of Timothy's church. Jimmy had helped Timothy load the shotguns into the car after the turkey shoot fundraiser. And Jimmy was adamant about one thing: the shotguns were unloaded when they left the church that night. Jimmy Abbott's testimony was clear and unwavering. Jimmy Abbott: I checked those guns myself. I made sure every one of them was unloaded before we put them in the car. There was no way that shotgun was loaded when Timothy took it home that night. Abbott's words struck at the heart of the defense's argument that the shooting was an accidental discharge. If the gun had been unloaded when Timothy took it home, the implication was chillingly clear. Timothy had reloaded the shotgun, making the shooting far from accidental. But the prosecution wasn't finished. Detective Scott Bartle took the stand next, his testimony calm and methodical. Bartle walked the jury through the investigation, outlining the inconsistencies in Timothy's story, his secret identity as Timothy McNally, and the financial troubles that had loomed large over the Tillman household. But it was Bartle's revelation about the forged check that truly cemented the prosecution's case. Detective Bartle: we discovered that Timothy Tillman had forged Janet's signature on a $5,000 loan check nearly 3 months after her death. He took out a loan in her name, knowing full well that she was already dead. The forgery wasn't just a financial crime, it was a window into Timothy's desperation. The man who had once been seen as a pillar of his community had grown so desperate that he forged his dead wife's signature to cover his mounting debts. And that $5,000 forgery was only part of the picture. The life insurance policy Janet had carried, worth a significant amount, now appeared to be the key motive for her death. The most damning evidence came when the prosecution revealed letters Timothy had sent to Molly Beasy from jail. These weren't love letters. They were instructions. In these letters, Timothy tried to manipulate Molly into influencing his daughter Tiffany's testimony, urging her to suggest changes to Tiffany's affidavit to fit his twisted narrative. The defense fought back, calling their own experts to the stand, including a firearms specialist who argued that the shooting could have been consistent with an accidental discharge. Richard Gorman worked tirelessly, planting seeds of doubt in the jury's minds, hoping that the circumstantial evidence would be enough to sway them. But the prosecution's case had been thorough, and the evidence was overwhelming. After hours of tense deliberation, the jury finally returned to the courtroom. The air was thick with tension as the foreman stood, the room falling silent. Timothy Tillman sat motionless, his face blank, as the foreman delivered the verdict. Foreman: we, the jury, find the defendant, Timothy Tillman, guilty of the murder of Janet Tillman. For a moment, there was silence, as if the weight of the verdict had frozen the room. But then, like a wave, the realization swept through. Janet's family, who had waited so long for justice, finally had the closure they so desperately sought. Timothy Tillman, the man who had once stood at the pulpit preaching faith and redemption, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Janet's family, the verdict brought a sense of peace, though nothing could ever bring Janet back. And for Joan, Janet's sister, who had fought tirelessly to uncover the truth, there was finally a moment to breathe. Timothy Tillman's life, built on lies, manipulation, and deceit, had finally collapsed. And the truth he had tried so hard to hide, had come crashing down with it. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. If you've made it to this point, drop a comment with the word "done," and we'll give you a personal shout-out to show our appreciation. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive in this murder and media frenzy. It was as fascinating for us to create as we hope it was for you to hear. If you found this episode thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We also invite you to join our YouTube channel, where we can answer your questions directly and share exclusive members-only content. We'd love to know what you think about this case. Was justice truly served? Share your opinions in the comments below. We're always eager to hear your thoughts. For those wanting to explore more on true crime, we've included an Amazon affiliate link to some of the books we referenced in our research. Purchasing through the link won't cost you anything extra, but it will support the channel and help us continue bringing you more content. If you're craving even more, consider joining our Patreon community. As a member, you'll get access to the full script of this episode, exclusive book summaries, and even the complete set of images featured in this case, available for purchase in our Patreon store. This has been 22 Crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.